Welcome to Future Trends, where we examine the latest stories reshaping tomorrow's international dynamics. This week's headlines: Peace agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan, Israel's plan to take control of Gaza City, Solomon Islands blocks US, China from Pacific Islands Forum, Rwanda-backed rebels kill over 300 civilians in Congo, where the world's stock markets aren't falling, and making rhino horns radioactive to fight poaching. Starting with politics, Solomon Islands blocks US, China from Pacific Islands Forum. Prime Minister Manil's decision to block multiple countries was reportedly to avoid diplomatic tensions over Taiwan's participation. Court limits European asylum seeker plan. Countries hoping to mirror Italy's practice of sending some asylum seekers rescued at sea to overseas deportation centers have been limited by Europe's top court. The ECJ ruled countries must ensure that asylum seekers aren't being sent back to dangerous situations in their home countries. Meanwhile, 3 African nations, Rwanda, South Sudan and Eswatini, have agreed to take deportees from the US. UK largest protest arrests in a decade. 466 people were arrested for showing support for Palestine Action, a group opposed to the Gaza war. It was declared a terrorist group after members broke into an Air Force facility causing minor damage to a plane. The Terrorism Act states a person commits an offense if the person expresses an opinion or belief that is supportive of a prescribed organization. The demonstrators were arrested for carrying placards supportive of Palestine Action. Chad's former PM and opposition leader sentenced to 20 years jail. Former Prime Minister and current opposition figure Success Masra was found guilty of hate speech, xenophobia, and inciting a massacre. The court in N'Djamena held Masra, a prominent critic of President Devi, responsible for encouraging intercommunal violence that left 42 people dead on May 14. El Salvador opens path for president to stay in power. El Salvador's Legislative Assembly eliminated presidential term limits, extended terms to 6 years, and removed runoff elections, paving the way for President Bukele to rule indefinitely. The constitutional reform follows years of democratic backsliding, including court purges, mass arrests of 86,000 citizens under permanent emergency powers, and a recent crackdown forcing over 100 civil society members into exile, raising concerns about Central America's flight toward authoritarianism. Turning to conflict news, peace agreement reached between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Neighboring countries, including Russia and Georgia, have reacted positively to the new US-brokered peace deal which ended decades of conflict. However, Iran said it will block a planned corridor in the Caucasus, citing concerns over the potential negative consequences of any foreign intervention near its borders. Israel's plan to take control of Gaza City. Israel's Political Security Cabinet approved a plan to take control of Gaza City, plus some refugee camps, despite intensifying criticism at home and abroad. Israeli military chief of staff Lieutenant Gen Zami reportedly cautioned that fully conquering Gaza would trap the military within the enclave and put the remaining hostages at risk. In response to the expanded military action, Germany said it would halt exports of equipment that could be used in the Gaza Strip. And broadcaster Al Jazeera said correspondent Anas al-Sharif and 3 other journalists were killed in a strike. Israel alleged he was with Hamas, while al-Sharif had denied any political affiliations. South Korea's military has shrunk by 20% in 6 years. South Korea's military shrank by 20% in the past 6 years to 450,000 troops, largely due to a sharp drop in the population of males of enlistment age for mandatory service in the country with the world's lowest birth rate. South Korea's military has steadily declined since the early 2000s, when it had about 690,000 soldiers. North Korea is believed to have an active duty military of about 1.2 million. Rwanda-backed rebels kill over 300 civilians in Congo. At least 319 people were killed over the past month in eastern Congo, with the UN describing the toll as one of the largest documented in such attacks since the M23 rebels resurfaced in 2022. Marcos says Philippines will be pulled into any war over Taiwan. President Marcos Jr. said his country would inevitably be drawn, kicking and screaming, into any war over Taiwan due to its proximity to the self-ruled island and the presence of large numbers of Filipino workers there, despite China's strong protest over such remarks. Marcos also said the Philippines, Coast Guard, and Navy defending its territorial interests in the South China Sea would never back down in the contested waters after the Chinese Coast Guard staged blocking maneuvers and used a powerful water cannon to try to drive away Philippine vessels from the disputed Scarborough Shoal. Moving to economics, and why the world's stock markets aren't falling. The US stock market is now trading on a multiple of 26 times earnings, 40% higher than long-term average. There is so much cash that investors have to place it somewhere, and across the developed world, including Europe, Japan and China, large amounts of cash are being invested in shares. European economy sees growth of only 0.1%. Europe's economy barely grew in the April-June quarter as concentrated earlier efforts to ship goods ahead of new US tariffs went into reverse and output fell for the continent's biggest economy, Germany. Growth was 1.4% over the same quarter a year ago. Nvidia and AMD to pay 15% of China chip sales revenues to US. In exchange, the two chipmakers will receive export licenses to sell Nvidia's H20 and AMD's MI308 chips in China. US President Trump last week said he would implement a 100% tariff on imports of semiconductors and chips unless a company was building in the United States. Milei struggles to unlock global capital markets for Argentina. Despite investor enthusiasm for President Milei's fiscal reforms and inflation control, Argentina remains locked out of international dollar markets, with borrowing costs at 7.71 percentage points above US Treasuries. The country faces a cause-and-effect challenge, needing market access to make reforms sustainable, while requiring sustainable reforms to gain affordable market access, with $57 billion owed to the IMF and foreign currency reserves still $6.4 billion in the red despite recent improvements. BP announces huge oil discovery off Brazil as OPEC Plus boosts production. The British oil company announced its biggest oil and gas discovery in 25 years at the Boomerang Prospect 404 kilometers off Rio de Janeiro, marking the company's 10th discovery this year as it abandons renewable energy strategy for traditional hydrocarbons. The announcement coincides with OPEC Plus raising production by 200,000 barrels daily in May, led by Saudi Arabia's strategy to recoup market share and discourage competitors amid volatile oil markets. In development news, Afghanistan has its sharpest surge ever of child malnutrition. Afghanistan is seeing its sharpest ever surge of child malnutrition, the World Food Programme said, adding it needed $539 million to help the country's most vulnerable families. Almost 10 million people, a quarter of Afghanistan's population, face acute food insecurity, with 1 in 3 children stunted. China moves to contain chikungunya outbreak. Measures include distributing mosquito nets and widespread spraying with insecticide to contain the virus, which is transmitted by infected mosquitoes and mostly causes mild symptoms. It was first identified in Tanzania in 1952. In rare cases, it can cause debilitating joint pain that persists for months or even years. There have been about 240,000 cases of chikungunya, including 90 deaths in 16 countries. US cancels $500 million in mRNA vaccine research. The decision will hit 22 projects on viruses such as bird flu and COVID-19, mRNA vaccines were first widely deployed during the pandemic and are credited with saving millions of lives. But US Health Secretary Kennedy Jr. believes that they pose more risks than benefits, saying they offer incomplete protection and can cause viruses to mutate. Colombia accuses Peru of fully annexing disputed island in Amazon River. Peru maintains it owns Santa Rosa Island based on treaties about a century old, but Colombia disputes that ownership because the island had not yet emerged from the river at the time. US violent crime drops 4.5%. FBI statistics show murder and non-negligent manslaughter fell nearly 15% in 2024 from a year earlier, continuing a decline that's been seen since a coronavirus pandemic-era crime spike. Reported hate crimes decreased 1.5%, according to the report, but were still the second highest reported by the FBI in the more than 30 years it has been collecting data. Finally, our social news: US to charge some foreign travelers up to $15,000 in visa bonds. The 12-month pilot program will give US consular officers the discretion to issue bonds to visitors from countries identified as having high visa overstay rates. While it did not identify countries, it is reported to include visa applicants from Malawi and Zambia. Chemical pollution, a threat comparable to climate change, scientists warn. More than 100 million novel entity chemicals are in circulation, with health impact not widely recognized. Fraudulent research is destroying trust in science. Networks of
bad actors work together to publish bogus research, a new study has found. The findings came from analyzing more than 5 million scientific articles published across 70,000 journals.
Making rhino horns radioactive to fight poaching. A South African university launched an anti-poaching campaign to inject the horns of rhinos with radioactive isotopes that it says are harmless for the animals, but can be detected by customs agents. Snails could change the way doctors treat human eye injuries. The freshwater apple snail can fully regrow its eyes within months after injury or amputation. Despite their small size, apple snails' camera-like eyes are genetically and structurally similar to human eyes. That's your Future Trends update for this week. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time with more stories reshaping our world.